This Hall of Trials rotation is about the same as the last one, except you now want a team with 0 matching elements instead of 2 light units. This is pretty nice since we can use pretty much the same teams before, and the strategy remains roughly the same. So our 3 core units are still ALots, Gaither, and Achates. ALots you just want fast with some bulk ideally, and Spirit's Breath plus 30 if you can. Achates also fast with bulk. Fan of Light and Darkness is her best one, otherwise give her any stat boosting artifact. And then for Gaither, it's just full damage. Like we mentioned before, POS is better than Cruel Mischief for some reason. Nobody knows why. And then Destruction and Torrent sets. And then for the last slot, you want any Ice or Earth unit. I use Destina because she can use 3 non-attack skills in a row. And there are alternatives, but first let's quickly go over why I think Destina is the best option. I'll be discussing all CR pushes as the reduced value after AUFE's passive is taken into account, which halves all CR pushes. So Destina's S2 gives an ally a 25% CR push, assuming you have her EE. Lots has a 50% CR push for an ally on S2, which sounds better, but the problem is he also CR pushes himself by 15% when he uses the skill. Since Destina/Lots can only use non-attack skills 3 times in a row, the amount of time we can actually spend in break phase is gated by this unit slot. Any CR pushes from this unit would be very bad, especially considering how fast you're going to be building your ALots and Achates. Looking at the speeds for my units in my final setup, with this being Destina's normal speed since I'm not using Lots, if you take the speed of the unit and divide it by lot speed, that's how much CR that this unit would get as Lots is gaining CR. And then if you take this and multiply it by 15, because Lots pushes himself by 15 when he uses S2, Lots gains 36 CR in the time it takes Lots to normally gain 15, Achates gains 33, and Aether gains 15. So while Lots gives 25 more CR than Destina on S2, we would have plus 25 and then minus 36, minus 33, minus 15. So we'd end up with a net loss of 59 usable CR when Lots uses S2 compared to Destina's S2. This happens twice each break phase, and there's also Lots' S3, which I don't feel like calculating, but he CR pushes his entire team by either 5% or 10% depending on whether you have it molded. You get the idea, the CR pushes are bad. And then there's Amelia, who has a 25% CR push on S2 just like Destina, but she also pushes herself by 12.5 CR, so she's just the worst Destina. And then there's also Angelica, who has no CR push for herself nor allies on S2, but having no CR push is better than having a CR push plus a self push. So Angelica's a pretty solid option, the only issue is that she's completely useless everywhere else. We can take a quick look at Destina stats as well. Nothing too special. You want the CR push E on her S2, extra 20%, reduced to 10% after AUFE S2. Warhorn just like before with a bunch of bulk, and I have her at a pretty low speed. I have her with a little bit of speed to hit some tunings, and this crit isn't necessary, it's just the only Unity gear I could find. And now let's quickly go over the differences that you'll be seeing in your run since we're not using Light Achates this time. So, Light Achates S3 gives her 10% CR every single time the enemy takes a turn if her S3 is available. This adds up since it lets her take turns more easily during the main phase, which helps with increasing the exhaustion bar, and it's also not active during the break phase, since AUFE generally isn't taking turns there. We lose out on that, so you might find it a little bit harder to clear the main phase. Comparing their S2s, Destina's S2 with her EE gives 5% more CR, which may have an impact during break phase. She is also able to use it on herself while Light Achates can't, so you might be able to use that to fix some turn order issues before going into break phase. Lastly, Destina's S1 gives a slight heal to the lowest HP ally. Light Achates S1 does nothing since it's just a stun. Destina's heal can help you with sustaining, but if she starts dual attacking everywhere, you might find it a bit hard to keep track of whether or not you were supposed to survive at some points. So it's something to keep an eye on. And then before getting into the actual run, I'm going to go over some additional tips. If you want to just see the run, you can use the chapters to jump ahead. First up, AUFE speed isn't exactly 0 during break phase. She's actually very, very, very slowly moving, probably because of the increased speed stacks that she's getting. If she has enough CR before break phase starts, she can actually take a turn, causing you to lose 2 turns during break phase instead of the usual 1. As long as her CR is 96% or lower, there shouldn't be any issues with this. On the topic of break phase, at the end of each break phase, AUV instantly takes a turn regardless of where she was in the CR bar. If you're struggling to clear her exhaustion bar during main phase, you can try ending break phase while some of your units are a bit closer to taking their turn, so you have more CR to work with during the main phase. Next, AUV's S3 extra damage proc is based on your current HP, not your max HP. This means that the amount of damage it deals is pretty deceptive, and you can actually be much lower HP than you'd expect. You do need to survive the initial S3 damage, as well as the bleeds that come afterwards, though you can cleanse those, but the extra damage proc from the S3 itself isn't too worrying. Lastly, whatever CR you get at the start lasts the entire fight from speed RNG, which is really annoying because if you have some tight timings, it might make these inconsistent. You can alleviate this by syncing your unit's CRs to each other, by CR pushing them to 100%. This is generally going to be done with ALots since its S2 has the largest CR push. By pushing them to 100%, you equalize their CRs to each other and remove any starting CR RNG, and they're going to be synced to move around ALots instead. For Destina, you probably want to do this during the main phase since you don't want her to be moving during break phase. The remaining RNG is going to be from ALots S1 duels since they CR push him. This can be partially alleviated by using ALots S3 to skip an S1 turn, but if it comes at a bad time where he pushes himself to 100%, or if he cuts somebody where he's not supposed to, or if he just duels too many times, it might break your tuning anyways. With that, let's finally get started and take a look at our run. So we start off the fight, and it's going to be pretty much the same as last time. We have no unbuffable in this team, so we just have to keep on hitting her with S1s to increase the exhaustion bar. I'm going to hit Egg at the start to not push her into break phase too fast later, just so I don't forget about it later. And then we just keep on slamming her with S1s. One thing is that since I have Destina built slower than I had Light Achates last time, and also we don't have the extra CR from Light Achates S3, she's not going to be moving as much. So we're going to make up for that by just healing a little bit less. Since this is phase 1, we're not taking that much damage. And we can just face tank everything. Destina manages to live there. And we can just use Gaither S2 to heal. I think I got a dual attack that healed him, but the heal is like 1300, so he would have lived with 900 HP and been fine. I'm going to turn on Achates' skill here so she can heal next turn. That's also where you can see AUV's S3 is the splash or the extra damage proc is current HP. We were pretty low HP, but even in spite of that, we didn't take that much damage. It was like a 500 damage proc on Gaither, which would have been much higher if we were higher HP. So we're just finishing up the phase now, and this is our first sinking turn. Destina's at 64% CR, so this S2 will push her to 100%. And now she's going to be moving based around ALots, and there's no speed RNG between the two of them. So moving into break phase, same as last time. Just spam your non-attack skills. We didn't get a fan proc there. ALots cuts, give attack buff. And the only person who's doing damage should be Gaither. Since we're running Destina slower than IHA, we have much more room in this run to push people that aren't Gaither and still not run out of turns. Destina can only take 3 turns, and we didn't get a fan proc there. And the reason we pushed Achates up there in the first place was to fish for a second fan proc so we could have it for S3. We missed both, but it is what it is. We're going to push Gaither past ALots here. So when ALots S2's next turn, he'll get the full 50% CR. We can't fish for fan procs forever due to Destina's turn limit. So we're just going to be pushing ALots now and moving forward in the fight. Still no fan proc. Pray for no duel. And now we're going to start fishing for fan procs, because we have 2 turns until Gaither is S3. So if we manage to get crit damage buff here, it'll last until his S3. So now we're going to see if we can get our first proc or not. Finally. So one thing is that you managed to get the crit debuff early here. You could split off, because I'm going to S2 Achates with ALots on my next turn. And since we have the crit debuff already, you don't have to. You could delay it for a bit, but I'm not planning out for 2 separate routes. This is a sinking turn for Achates. You can see it's exactly 15, which is how much you would have gotten from S2, the self-push. And it's also a gimme that you sync ALots with Gaither at some point, just because you're pushing him so much. So at this point, all 4 of them should be synced with each other, and there's no speed RNG between them. And Destina's used her final non-attack skill, so we're gotta speed it up a bit so that she doesn't take her 4th turn. Overall, really unlucky on the fan procs during this break phase, but this break phase is only like a quarter of our damage, so it's not a huge deal. Now we're going into phase 2. One thing about phase 2 is I was kind of hitting buttons randomly and it just worked out, so I'm not too sure exactly what's going on here for the most part, but it works out, so it doesn't really matter. Push Destina ahead, probably for some tuning stuff later. And we do need to heal more, because going into phase 2, she has much more attack now, so she's going to be doing more damage. You still don't need to use Achates S2 though. It's not desperate levels of healing. We just need to actually use Achates S3 and not skip it. We heal up with Gaither S2 here, and now we're going to push up Gaither for tuning purposes. I'm going to use Gaither S3 for the CR push. The CR push going into himself, of course. Now Euphane is going to just barely cut Achates, which is fine, because it lets us use S3 right after she uses her S2. So now let's just keep going until she uses her S3. She's used her S3, and Achates S3 is still on cooldown, so we're just going to push up Gaither instead and have him heal. Gaither resisted the strip on his shield, but he'd live anyways without it, or even if it got stripped. We're going to Achates S3 anyways, just to be consistent. So last run, or during the run last rotation, I managed to clear phase 2 with 8 turns left. Only 7 turns this time, so it's a little bit tighter, but we're still able to clear, so it's not a huge deal. But we are back, and with slightly higher damage, it's had better fan RNG on the first phase this time. No dual attack. So we're going to S2 Achates, and Achates is going to S2 herself. And from here, you're going to notice that this is literally the exact same rotation I was doing in phase 1 pretty much, except I think Destina's slightly closer to us now than she was in phase 1. This was just pure luck. I came into the phase and I was like, hey, this kind of looks like phase 1, and it just worked fine. So we're just going to do what we did in phase 1. We got crit damage there, but we're going to fish for a second proc. Didn't get it. Push Gaither ahead of ALots here. And now we just go through the phase. Time to fish for some more fan procs. Achates. Chance 1, and we managed to get it. So like I mentioned earlier, this is where you could stall the upcoming ALots S2 onto Achates for later to try and cover a different set of turns since you got the crit damage buff already, but I refuse to plan out 2 separate routes, or more than 2 routes depending on how many split situations like this you have. We're going to push up ALots. And since Destina's taken her last non-attack skill turn, we're going to have to spam push ALots and get out of the break phase. Okay, so now we've made it clear. Phase 3 is pretty much going to be the same. She's just faster and has more attack now. Just have 14 stacks of that. So we have 6 turns left to clear, which is doable. It's going to be very tight. The annoying thing about her final turn when she hits 0 is she doesn't kill you automatically, but she will be very, very fast. So you only really have like half a turn to work there. But it is still some wiggle room. Gaither S2. Okay, so now Achates S3, so we can cleanse off all of the bleeds. And then for tuning purposes, I'm going to S3 Destina here. She's at 69% CR, so this isn't the full 50%. It's because I do need to push her up, but I wanted to limit how much I was pushing her up because I was overcapping how much CR I was giving her and it was making the down phase annoying. And test 2, we just S1. So now Yuffie uses her S3, and we're going to push up Gaither to heal us. You can see the extra damage proc there is massive because of the scaling on it, where it increases each time it's used up to 50% of your max HP. Or your current HP, rather. Yeah. So we pushed up Gaither. Now we're just going to spam S1s for a bit. We still got a decent amount of her exhaustion bar to work through. So we're going to make sure we do that in time. Now we're going to Destina ourselves here, S2 ourselves, for turn order purposes, and also just to get her fast enough to move before Yuffie takes her final turn. I think I was supposed to S3 with the Achates there. It'll be fine. $81, that's fine. And we just barely managed to get our turn here. You can see during that turn, Yuffie was zooming down the CR bar because of her Berserk buff. You also see that after I use S1 here, she's going to take her turn, it's going to proc my Warhorn, which makes it a little bit more annoying for tuning. But we're going to start off by doing pretty much the same thing as in the second phase. The only thing is, since Warhorn procced and Destina got a little bit of extra CR, and also just because of her general positioning, It's going to be a little bit tighter than it was in Phase 1 and Phase 2, so we're going to have to change it up a bit after a certain point. We did manage to get our crit debuff, but we're going to just do the normal S2 Gaither. Push him ahead of ALots, just barely. You can see here, Destina is pretty much about to go already. So we're going to S1. Yeah, so in Phase 1 and Phase 2, it was ALots S2 and then Destina S3, and actually S3s before he even S2s. So from here, we're going to S2 Achates. Then we're going to S2 Gaither. Normally we S2 Achates here, but we need to make full use of the CR and have no wasted CR from ALots' pushes. Now we're going to S2 Achates. In doing so, we did make it so we don't get an extra chance for a crit debuff on ALots or Gaither's S2 that just passed, but there's no choice because of something we're setting up for the very end of the run. So we push ALots, and now we S2 Achates again. I'm going to look for crit debuff, which we managed to get. Gaither manages to cut ahead of ALots, and Destina's out of turns now. So coming up on the final turn, we push up Gaither one last time. And we do manage to get here in time. So we're going to S2 Gaither to give him his S2 back, and we managed to get the crit debuff. We're going to S2, and that's the run. So the base score on this run was higher than my Light Achates run. I didn't change any gear. I'd say it's probably because I had much more opportunities to proc Fan. So better odds of getting crit damage buff is probably what made the difference. Aside from that, the run's pretty much the same. You just need to be a little bit tighter with your tunings since you don't get so much free CR. I hope this managed to help anybody who is struggling to figure out their new tunings in this rotation. If you're curious why my score is 46 million, even though the last run was pretty much perfect and it was only 41, you can see that in the video in the description. It involves dual attacks at the end of break phase. Also, while I was doing this comp, somebody in Asia server figured out a pretty funny comp that I'll probably take a look at tomorrow. It's, if you're pushing for top 100, I think it's definitely more accessible, unless you have 3 Unity sets lying around. But if you're just looking for top 5%, it's probably not worth the trouble. And I'm actually not sure whether that comp or this one scores higher if you're pushing top 3, but it's something to take a look at.